Welcome to WikiPodcast. You know, we often like to think of ourselves as pretty logical beings, especially when making decisions, right? We picture ourselves carefully weighing all the angles.
Calculating everything out.
Exactly, like this super rational person, methodically analyzing data, calculating odds, and, landing on the absolute perfect choice every time.
That's definitely the ideal, isn't it? The perfect rational decision maker. But reality, well, it's usually quite a bit messier than that, as we all find out.
Yeah, it really is. And that's what we're digging into today, the psychology of thought that actually drives our decisions. Our mission here is to explore why our choices often, stray from that purely rational path. What's really going on under the hood?
It's such an important area because even when we feel like we're making a conscious, reasoned choice, selecting a belief or deciding on an action, there's just this whole universe of cognitive stuff and, frankly, other influences bubbling away beneath the surface.
Totally. Things that can push us in directions we didn't even expect.
Exactly. And those things can lead us way off course sometimes.
We're definitely not just walking calculators. I mean, our environment, how we're feeling inside, all these factors can have a surprisingly big impact on the choices we make. So where do we start trying to unpack this gap between, like, rational ideals and how we actually decide things?
Well, a useful place to begin is maybe distinguishing between problem solving and decision making. They're obviously related, but they're not exactly the same process.
Okay, interesting. Problem solving versus decision making. What's the core difference there?
So problem solving is really about finding ways to tackle an issue. You're investigating, gathering information, maybe identifying potential solutions. Think of it like being a detective, understanding the scene, figuring out who the suspects might be.
Right, gathering clues.
Yeah. Decision-making, though, that's more about choosing one of those suspects, picking a specific course of action based on the information you've gathered.
Ah, okay. So problem solving is like generating the options list, and
Yeah.
decision making is checking one of the boxes.
That's a good way to put it, yes. Usually, problem-solving happens first. You analyze things, brainstorm possibilities, then you use that info to decide what to actually do. Problem-solving often starts when we see something's wrong, like a deviation from what we expect.
Mm,
Decision-making, though, tends to start with goals. What do we want to achieve? You rank them, maybe, and then figure out which option gets you closest.
that makes sense. So when our decision making kind of goes off the rails, where does the breakdown usually happen in this sequence?
Well, there are a few common places where things can get stuck. One big one is something called analysis paralysis.
Oh, yeah, I think I know this one.
Right. It's when we get so caught up analyzing the problem, maybe just overwhelmed by all the information or feeling like we have to check every single tiny detail, that we just freeze. We
Huh.
become unable to actually make the decision.
Been there. It feels like you're trapped in this loop, right? Looking at the same stuff over and over, thinking, just one more piece of data, then I'll know.
Exactly. And it can show up in different ways. Sometimes it's literally just reviewing the same info again and again. It's like analysis process paralysis.
Yeah.
You're just stuck in the review cycle.
Right.
Other times, it's this endless hunt for more and more information, trying to achieve perfect certainty precision paralysis, which, let's be honest, is often impossible.
Yeah, you'll never get all the info.
Never. And then there's risk uncertainty paralysis, just wanting to eliminate every possible risk before you move forward. That can keep you totally stuck, too.
So thinking too much can really paralyze you. But what about the flip side, like acting too fast?
Yeah, absolutely. The opposite extreme is maybe what you could call extinction by instinct. This is where we make decisions really impulsively, without proper planning or thinking through the consequences. It's like the gut reaction just completely takes over.
And that sounds like it could lead to some bad outcomes, maybe especially when you're in a group.
Oh, for sure. A classic example of that is groupthink. This happens when the pressure to keep the group happy and avoid any conflict becomes, well, more important than actually looking critically at the different options.
Ah, okay. So everyone just goes along to get along.
Pretty much. The group kind of rushes to agree, off pushing down any voices that disagree. And that definitely fits under this umbrella of, quick, maybe instinct-driven decisions that skip the rational analysis part.
Hmm.
People might even privately disagree, but just stay silent.
Interesting. So we can be frozen by too much thinking or act too quickly without enough. What about just the sheer amount of information coming at us all the time?
That's another huge one. Information overload. The saying, too much of a good thing. It definitely applies to information when you're trying to decide something. Our brains just have limits on how much they can process effectively.
Like our working memory gets swamped.
Exactly. When the amount of data coming in exceeds our capacity to make sense of it, the quality of our decisions tends to drop. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose. You just can't take it all in properly.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
And this overload can actually lead to something tricky called the illusion of knowledge.
Illusion of knowledge. What's that?
It's where having access to tons of information makes us feel like we know more than we really do. So our confidence in our decisions goes up, even though our actual accuracy might be going down because we can't process it all properly.
Wow, that's kind of scary. You think you're smarter because you have more data, but you're actually making worse choices.
It can happen, yeah. We mistake volume for understanding.
Okay, so what about just being tired, like after making a bunch of decisions already?
Yeah, yes.
Huh.
That leads us to decision fatigue. Making lots of choices, even small ones, throughout the day just drains our mental batteries.
Totally feel that by the end of the day.
Right. And that leads to a noticeable decline in the quality of the decisions we make later on. You might carefully weigh your options in the morning, but by evening, deciding what to watch. You might just click the first thing you see or avoid choosing altogether.
Or just order takeout because deciding what to cook is too much.
Exactly. That fatigue can push us towards being more impulsive, just wanting to get it over with, or toward just avoiding the decision entirely. It's different from analysis paralysis, where you're stuck analyzing. Here, you're actively trying not to decide.
These breakdowns are really fascinating and kind of humbling, honestly. But what's going on inside our heads, like in the brain itself when we're making choices? Does neuroscience give us any clues?
Oh, it certainly does.
Yeah.
Decision-making is a huge area in neuroscience. There are several brain regions known to be really important. The anterior cingulate cortex, for example, helps us spot conflicts and errors.
Okay.
Then there's the orbitofrontal cortex, which is involved in evaluating like rewards and risks.
Yeah.
And the ventromedial prefrontal cortex seems crucial for bringing emotions into the decision process.
So these parts are working together to weigh options and predict outcomes.
Yeah, they're involved in weighing things up, predicting what might happen, and also learning from our past choices. Damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, for instance, can make it really hard for people to make advantageous decisions, probably because they struggle to factor in the potential emotional fallout.
Okay, emotions. We usually think of those as being the enemy of rational thought, right? But you're saying they actually play a role.
A huge role, it seems,
Right.
especially when things are uncertain. There's this idea called the somatic marker hypothesis. It suggests that our emotions, which we often experience as bodily feelings, gut feelings, actually help guide us.
Gut feelings, like they're real biological signals.
Kind of, yeah. As we think about different options and what might happen, these emotional signals, based on past experiences, can subtly push us towards choices that felt good before and away from ones that felt bad. They act like little warning or encouragement flags.
So those feelings aren't just random noise. They're actually carrying useful information, maybe unconsciously.
That's the core idea. It's this complex dance between the systems generating these feelings and the cognitive systems interpreting them. It suggests that maybe a purely cold, logical, emotionless decision process isn't always the best way to navigate a complex world.
That really blurs the line, doesn't it, between what we call rational and irrational, which brings us to, well, what is the difference technically?
Well, the classic economic model is rational choice theory.
Hmm.
It basically assumes people will consistently pick the option that gives them the most personal benefit, given the info they have, from their own point of view.
Right, it's rational for them.
Exactly. It doesn't mean everyone would make the same choice, but as we've been saying, lots of things pull us away from that purely logical calculation.
Like how a problem is framed.
Precisely. People often make contradictory choices depending on how the exact same problem is presented. That's a big deviation from pure rationality. So ideally, rational decision-making is logical, objective, analytical. Irrational is more hasty, maybe impulsive, not fully weighing the outcomes.
And you mentioned something earlier, subjective expected utility, SEU. How does that fit?
Right. SEU theory kind of refines the rational model. It says we weigh the potential value or utility of each outcome, but also factor in our subjective guess of how likely that outcome is. It tries to account for the fact that our personal judgments of value and probability aren't always perfectly objective.
Okay, so it's trying to model rational choice, but with our human subjectivity baked in. But we haven't really hit the big one yet, Cognitive biases. I feel like those must mess things up constantly.
Oh, absolutely. Cognitive biases are these systematic ways our thinking deviates from pure logic or rationality.
Mm.
They have a huge impact, especially when we're stressed, short on time, or dealing with something really complex. And the kicker is they're often unconscious. We don't even realize they're steering the ship.
Okay, let's dive into some common ones. This is where I start recognizing myself. Probably too much.
Huh, yeah. A really big one is selective search for evidence, better known as confirmation bias.
Yep.
We naturally tend to look for information that confirms what we already believe, and we ignore or downplay stuff that challenges it. It's like building a case, not finding the truth.
Guilty. What else?
Then there's premature termination of search. That's grabbing the first good enough option that comes along without really checking if there might be something much better out there.
Okay, impatience bias.
Sort of. Then cognitive inertia, just resisting changing our minds even when the evidence is strong. Selective perception is seeing what we expect or want to see, filtering out the rest. And of course, wishful thinking, believing something is true just because we really, really want it to be.
Definitely done that. It feels better sometimes, doesn't it?
It does in the short term. There's also choice supportive bias. After you choose something, you tend to remember it as being even better than it was, and you conveniently forget the good points of the options you rejected.
Oh, interesting. Like justifying your past decisions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And recency and primacy affects the first and last things you hear, often stick more than the middle. Repetition bias, believing something, just because you've heard it over and over again, regardless of the source.
That explains a lot about advertising. And maybe politics. Okay, what else? Anchoring?
Ah, yes, anchoring and adjustment. We get fixated on the first piece of information we receive, the anchor, and then we don't adjust our thinking enough based on later info. That first number or idea just sticks.
Right.
We talked about groupthink, peer pressure, overriding good judgment. Source credibility bias is dismissing good info because you don't like the messenger, or believing bad info because you do.
It's like our brains have all these little shortcuts, but they can lead us down the wrong path.
I really can. And there are more, like incremental decision-making and escalating commitment, throwing good money after bad, essentially, because you've already invested so much. Instead of starting fresh, like with zero-based decision-making.
The sunk cost fallacy is part of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Then attribution asymmetry. My successes are because I'm brilliant. My failures are bad luck. Your successes are luck. Your failures are your fault. We do that a lot.
Ouch.
Role fulfillment. Making choices expected of your role. Underestimating uncertainty and the illusion of control, thinking we have more power over random events than we do.
Okay, keep going. This is fascinating.
Framing bias is huge. How the options are presented drastically changes choices. That includes the sunk cost stuff and prospect theory, how we handle potential gains versus potential losses differently. We tend to be risk-averse for gains, but risk-seeking to avoid losses.
So losing $100 feels worse than gaining $100 feels good.
Generally, yes, for most people. And finally, optimism bias. We tend to overestimate good things happening to us and underestimate the bad.
Wow, okay. That is quite a list. It makes you wonder how we ever make a decent decision. So with all these biases swirling around, do people generally approach decision-making in different styles?
Yeah, broadly speaking, one important difference is between optimizing and satisficing. Optimizers or maximizers really try to find the absolute best possible option. They research everything.
Exhausting.
It can be. Satisficers, on the other hand, look for an option that's just good enough. It meets their basic criteria, and they stop searching.
And who's happier?
Research often suggests satisficers are. Maximizers might get slightly better objective outcomes sometimes, but they tend to feel more regret, more stress, less happy with their final choice, because they're always wondering if something better was out there.
That makes total sense. Always chasing perfection sounds tiring. What about that intuitive versus rational thinking idea, System 1 and System 2?
Right, that's a really influential way to think about it, popularized by Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah.
The dual process theory proposes we have two main ways of thinking. System 1 is fast, automatic, intuitive, effortless. It relies heavily on those heuristics and biases we just talked about.
That's the gut reaction.
Basically, yes. System 2 is the opposite. Slow, deliberate, analytical, requires conscious effort and attention. It's what we typically think of as reasoning.
So System 1 is running most of the time or everyday stuff, and System 2 has to be deliberately switched on for harder problems.
Pretty much. System 1 is very efficient, which is why we use it so much, but it's prone to errors. System 2 can override it and make more logical choices, but it takes work, uses up mental energy, and frankly, we don't always engage it. even when maybe we should.
This has been incredibly insightful. It really paints a picture of just how many hidden forces shape our choices. And you mentioned briefly, way back, that even our environment plays a part.
It does, yes. Even just the complexity of our surroundings, the number of different things going on, the variety of stimuli can influence our cognitive function and therefore our decisions.
How so? Like a cluttered desk makes for bad choices. Or the opposite.
Actually, research suggests a moderately complex environment can sometimes stimulate cognitive function, maybe leading to more nuanced thinking. Up to a point, of course.
Huh. So a little bit of chaos might actually be good for the brain. That's counterintuitive.
It seems that way. A moderate level might keep us more engaged, more alert. But obviously, as we talked about with information overload, there's definitely a tipping point where too much complexity just becomes overwhelming and hurts decision making.
Fascinating stuff. So, wrapping this all up, it really feels like while we aspire to be these purely rational decision makers, our psychology is this incredibly complex mix. It's cognitive processes, sure, but also emotions, gut feelings, and this whole minefield of biases that often nudge us down paths that, well, aren't always perfectly logical.
That's really the heart of it. And just recognizing these different influences, the biases, the fatigue, the shortcuts our brain takes, that's probably the most crucial first step.
Hmm.
Becoming more aware of our own tendencies might help us pause and maybe make slightly more informed choices going forward.
Thanks for listening. Write us your opinion on one irrational decision you've made and what factors do you think contributed to it in the comments. Subscribe to the channel to help more listeners reach our episodes. Thank you and have an amazing day.